Okay. Hopefully everyone can see my screen here. I've got a PowerPoint, a purple slide up here. I'm going to kind of give you an overview, kind of quickly go through some of these slides, and then we can go over some of the
Amy,
questions.
we can't see your screen.
Okay. What are you seeing? Looks like I am sharing.
I see a black screen on my side.
Yeah, same.
Okay. Let's try it again.
There we go. I can see it now.
All right. Okay, perfect. So what is the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Program? This is actually a national program. This is not a state-funded program. So basically what that means is that Oregon has a cooperative agreement with the USDA to administer this program. So all of the guidelines and requirements of this program are determined by the USDA, and then they are giving out these funds to every state based on a formula of gross receipts from a lot of the products that are eligible under the program. So every state has an amount available for the funding, and that is predetermined by the USDA. And those are federal dollars, those are not state tax dollars. So I think that's important. Sometimes people get a little confused about these programs and what the purpose of them are and how they're stood up by state agencies. But in this instance, this is a national program, and as far as we know, this is one-time funding. And essentially what this is USDA's response to some of what we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic with supply chain disruption. And this is part of their effort to help states recover from that by standing up infrastructure and projects around the state that can help stabilize the food system and help a lot of emerging farms and businesses enter new markets potentially through these funds. These funds are specifically for the middle of the supply chain. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. If you are a producer or a grower, you would need to be using these funds for middle of the supply chain purposes and not production-based purposes. So everything, post-harvest, post-farm gate would be those types of activities that this program will allow. So I'm going to go over how Oregon's program is rolling out, the timeline for our grant, and then just the application process so everybody is familiar with that. So I just went over what the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Program is. And I will say this is part of the USDA's Food System Transformation Framework, which is a $4 billion amount of funding that USDA announced a little bit over a year ago. And so they're putting out these different funding programs incrementally. And so this is one of those. So as I mentioned, the purpose of it is to build up the middle of the supply chain, basically help us get more mid-scale infrastructure set up around the state to support aggregation, processing, manufacturing, storing product, and transporting that product. And this is within their mission to strengthen the local and regional food system, because we know this has been something that a lot of the industry has been asking for, and I think USDA has heard that, and so this program is somewhat in response to that need. And the idea is that this can help move food more at a local and regional level. So these are some of the allowable products under the Resilient Food System Infrastructure Program. So specialty crops that are edible, essentially, are allowed. So any fruit or vegetable, edible tree nuts, horticulture products that are edible, nursery, cut flowers that are edible, herbs, things like that are part of the specialty crop category. Dairy products are also allowed, grains for human consumption, aquaculture, and then there's some other food product categories. But one thing this program does exclude is meat and poultry and wild-caught seafood. So for those of you that may be mixed facilities and handling some of those products, that doesn't mean that you're ineligible for these funds. It means that portion of your business that those activities include those products are ineligible, but we can answer questions about that because it's sort of a case-by-case situation with those unallowable products. These are the eligible entities that can apply for the funds. And we are getting a lot of great questions from some of these institutions like schools and universities who do some aggregation, especially in rural areas. We have a number of school districts that have facilities and can hold product or even aggregate product for other schools, particularly in rural areas. And so we are getting lots of questions from some of these businesses or institutions kind of in the middle. Also, food hubs kind of serve in that capacity too. But these are the list of eligible entities. So nonprofit organizations, local governments are also eligible if they are operating some of these middle of the supply chain businesses, as well as tribal governments, and then agricultural producers or processors or groups of those producers and processors. Those are also eligible. So we have two tracks for this funding. Our conversation today is mostly focused on the infrastructure grant because that is the track that's currently open. I will say briefly that we do have an equipment only or a simplified equipment only grant that will open on February 1st. And so you can see there that the range of funds available are from $10,000 to $100,000. That grant will only be able to provide funds to purchase equipment. And there will be basically no other expenses allowed. So installing that equipment or training folks on how to use that equipment, unfortunately, that's not allowed according to the USDA. So this is simply to purchase the equipment. Again, that equipment must be for activities within the middle of the supply chain. There is no matching requirement for that grant program. So we're mostly going to focus on questions you have related to the infrastructure track today. It's a pretty small group, so I imagine if you did have questions about the equipment, we could answer those. But we are focusing on this track that's currently open. So the infrastructure track is much larger in scope and also in the funding that's available. So we have projects starting at a minimum of $100,000 up to $2 million in asks for that track. And this is a little bit longer time period of funding. These funds will run for about 3 years, or the grant period will run for about 3 years. Again, that will depend on when USDA approves our plan, which I'll talk about in a moment, and then when the funding ends. So there is a 25 to 50% match requirement. I am going to spend a couple of minutes talking about match because we are getting lots of questions about that. But I did want to make sure that that was clear. This can be in the form of in-kind or cash match. So you don't need to have cash match for this track. However, you are allowed to have both or a combination of them. And the 25% is a qualifying match, which I'll talk about in a moment too. So you do need to meet the definition of the USDA's priority groups to be able to apply with that reduced 25% match requirement. So I'll talk about that in a moment too. And, overall, the purpose is to expand capacity in the middle of the supply chain with these infrastructure dollars. Oops, did I miss one? I will say that the infrastructure can include, any processing equipment that you might need for a new processing line, cold storage, training and technical assistance. Those are allowable expenses under the infrastructure grant. coming into food safety compliance, or if you need specific certification in your processing facility, those types of costs would be allowed under that. Installation and construction of new facilities or new buildings is also allowed, as well as some of the refrigerated vehicles that would be necessary for what you're doing in the middle of the supply chain. So that needs to be the primary purpose of the vehicle. For example, it couldn't be a pickup truck that you're using for other purposes in addition to the middle of the supply chain, but a refrigerated van or refrigerated vehicle that you're specifically using for the project would be allowed. There is no, you're not able to use the infrastructure dollars to purchase land or purchase a new building. However, you can build a new building with the dollars. So Oregon's, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about how Oregon's rolling out the grant program. So again, we've got 2 tracks, the infrastructure project track, which is open right now. That will run on a 3-year timeline. There will be some annual reporting requirements with this infrastructure grant, likely progress reports and final reports. And typically what we require is a expenditure workbook that needs to be reviewed and approved by ODA. Just sort of tracks how you're spending the dollars and that you're, correctly using those dollars towards your approved project and your approved expenses. And then the equipment grant will run similarly, but in a smaller timeline, a 1-year grant, and there will be the same kind of reporting required with that as well. And then ODA will have we currently have an advisory or review committee that's going to be reviewing the applications and scoring applications based on their merits. We do have 15 members of the industry in Oregon that work in this space with the middle of the supply chain that will be on that committee. And then this is our funding breakdown. So we have $2.8 million in infrastructure funds available. We have $1.2 million in equipment. The state also has $1 million in state-led infrastructure projects, or I think maybe a better way to describe that is coordination projects. So basically those funds will be used to help support the infrastructure and equipment projects that are funded in the state. And then the rest of that, because that doesn't totally add up to 5.9 million, is for administration of the program. So ODA will be hiring 2 positions to support the program. Right now, Gabrielle and I are sort of serving in a temporary capacity to support the program, but very soon we've just received legislative approval to hire positions, or we will be very soon. And so that funding will be used to support those positions, and then the administration and paperwork, invoicing and all of that overhead costs will be included in those dollars as well. So I mentioned that in order to be eligible for that 25% match requirement, that you need to meet the USDA's definition of these priority groups. And so these are those groups: small and underserved business owners, historically underserved farmers and ranchers, and other businesses that qualify under SBA categories of small disadvantaged business, women-owned business, or veteran-owned small business. I will show you where you can find those terms in USDA's guidelines document after these slides here. That way you can read how they're describing these groups. And then in the application, which we'll go to in a moment too, you'll be able to self-select or self-certify that you meet these. You meet the definition of these groups to qualify for that match. So I mentioned this a few moments ago, but these are some of the examples of the types of infrastructure projects that would be eligible under this grant program. So I mentioned, food safety requirements and installing appropriate equipment or infrastructure to come into food safety compliance. Projects that focus on enhancing worker safety, also very important, can also be funded. new technologies and improvements to existing technologies that you might already have installed, those would also be allowed. And you can see some of these other ones here: modernizing existing equipment, manufacturing equipment, or supporting the construction of new facilities are all different types of allowable costs. There's also a bullet point on here related to the Northwest Rocky Mountain Food Business Center, which is a new regional food business center of 6 states in the Pacific Northwest and Mountain Plains. And I will show you where some of those goals are, because if some of you are working towards those aligned goals with the center in your projects, you can indicate that in your application as well. There are not points specifically for doing that. However, the USDA is asking us to coordinate with the Food Business Center and coordinate the RFSI with that. So there is an interest in seeing how projects are aligned with the center's goals. So I will show you those in a moment as well. And then these are some of the examples of what they are allowing for or hoping to see with the equipment purchases. Some similarities, obviously, with if you need a new piece of equipment to improve or enhance worker safety and come into compliance with any OSHA rules, or there's certain equipment you need for transporting product or improving your food safety on site. There's also priorities for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and following USDA's climate action goals. If anyone has more water or energy use related projects. Okay, so our timeline is right now the infrastructure grant did open January 1st. We're in the process of having our office hours. This is our last office hour scheduled. And the RFA will close February 29th. And then after that time, applications will be processed and it'll be determined, whether they're eligible for review internally. And then the week of March 8th is when we hope that that pool of applications will go to the review committee, and they will start evaluating the proposals. And then by the week of April 7th, they will have a discussion. And then towards the end of April, those applications and recommendations will go up to the director's office for selection. And we hope that by the week of May 1st, we'll be able to notify applicants of their awardship. And then it'll take us a little while to get that paperwork together. We do have to submit our plan for how those grants will be funded to the USDA. So we hope to do that by the end of May. And they'll need a few months to look over, every state's plan for how they're going to spend the funds and those applications that emerged to the top. So we hope that grant work can start in August 2024, but it may be a little bit later than that. We'll just have to see how the timeline goes with USDA. And then the equipment grant, like I said, that'll open February 1st, and that has a shorter period of openness that will close February 29th, and it follows the same timeline on the right with review. All right, application process. So as I mentioned, once we get the applications in after February 29th, they'll be reviewed by internal staff to determine that the project proposals and the expenses are allowable, everything's complete, they're feasible projects. And then stage 2 is they'll go to the advisory committee for review. Advisory committees, they will basically review those proposals and score them. So there are score sheets that you're able to see how they're evaluated. That is in the application material. So if you want to see what those criteria are that they're using, the score sheets are available. So they will submit those score sheets to the agency. Those will also be going up to the director's office with those that are recommended for awardship. And then stage 3 is ODA leadership selection. So the director will make final decisions about applications and use any priorities that the agency have towards the grants, which can sometimes mean that, they're looking for good geographic diversity and investment around the state, and other priorities as well. And then once they're selected, they move to USDA for final review. So really quickly, some of the required documentation. The infrastructure grant program does have a cover page, and where you fill out, basic information about your business. And there's some questions about ensuring that, you're in good standing with the state, and you're eligible to apply for these funds. There's the application itself. And then there's a couple of attachments. One of those is a critical resource and infrastructure letter, which, depending on how you are using any existing facilities or resources, you may need to complete. So this could be used, for example, if you are leasing a facility, and there's another owner, or there's an owner or a landlord to this facility. They would need to complete this if it was going to be something you're going to use for your project. So that critical resource and infrastructure letter is in the application materials on our webpage, which I'll show you in a minute. But that's something to keep in mind, that you may have to have someone fill that out. And basically it just states how you'll be using the facility, and that it's an assurance that you'll have access to that facility during the project if you don't own it. And then for all of your matching that you're bringing towards the project, there is a verification letter that's required. So, if you have contractors, or if you have partners that are going to be providing match towards your project, they would need to complete this verification letter. And so there's also a template of that on the webpage. Equipment grant, when that opens, it's essentially very similar. The only missing piece would be those matching funds, which are not necessary for the equipment track. There is no matching requirement. Okay, so I'm going to stop presenting, and I did just want to show you a couple of links. Figure out how to get out of here. All right, let's get back to sharing. So if you aren't already on our general email distribution, please send an email to Resilient System Grant here and get signed up. We're communicating a lot with folks that way. We're also sending out any relevant announcements or details about the grant. This is a resource page that we're going to send out. If you wouldn't mind putting your email in the chat box, we can send you this document after today's office hours. It has some really useful links for information in here. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of those. So let's see. Okay, so one of the first links in that document is obviously to our webpage, where you can get all of the grant information. One thing I wanted to point out here on the webpage is an application training video. And this goes, I don't know how many of you have watched this. We've been trying to promote this, but this is a pre-recorded training video that Gabrielle did that basically walks you through every step of the application process. If you haven't already watched this, I would really recommend that you do, because it's very detailed, and she goes over essentially every detail in the application process that I think everyone needs to know about. So, okay, great. Looks like somebody has watched it. So anyway, please review the training video. And if you still have questions after you watch the training video, please feel free to send an email to the general inbox here at Resilient System Grants. So I did want to point that out. And then on this page, you will also find at the bottom, so you really do have to page down, everything's there, but all the resources that you're going to need to apply. So Here is our application in English. Here is another link to the application training video. And here is the template for applying. So these are, up here is actually the guidelines document. And then, of course, those required attachments that I was talking about, attachment A, attachment B for the matching funds. You do need to make sure that you are registered with the federal government through with a UEI number, which is basically a number that you are going to need to be verified to accept federal funds from the state. So you do need to make sure that you apply for your UEI number. It takes a few minutes to do, but make sure you cover that base if you are going to apply. And then the other thing I wanted to point out about the application, we've been getting a lot of questions about the template. When you open the application template, you will likely see, and mine's now downloaded and working properly, but you will likely see a note here that says that you're not able to open this document. You need to download the document onto your computer, put it in a folder, put it on your desktop, and then open it from that location. You don't want to open it in your browser. People are having a really hard time with getting that application open. But I did just want to make sure you knew that. I did also want to cover really quickly. So this is the Northwest Rocky Mountain Food Business Center webpage. Again, these are new centers that the USDA established at the same time that they opened the RFSI funding. So they want these two initiatives to be working hand in hand. And I'm putting it in the chat box here so you have this link. It's also on the list of resources I'm going to send out to you. But anyway, this is the Rocky Mountain Food Business Center. This center that's composed of these 6 states here is going to be working over the next 4 years to develop technical assistance and training opportunities for small farm and food businesses in the state. And they have basically 4 different priority areas. You can see those listed here under their high priority issues tab. One of those is building the animal protein supply chain. Obviously, with these funds, animal proteins are ineligible. However, you can still be working in that industry, but you wouldn't be able to use your project towards this goal. But there may be some other ways that you can indicate that your project's aligned with the centers. So there's also a priority area for creating diverse markets for climate resilient agriculture. So grains for human consumption, as I mentioned, are eligible. Cover cropping systems that may have end consumer markets would also be eligible. And so those are, that's one way your project could align with the Rocky Mountain Food Business Center. And on the application itself, there is a place for you to indicate that. And then connecting and scaling food entrepreneurs. So if some of you are helping to make value-added products with specialty crops, for example, and you're supporting some of these emerging food businesses, either through co-packing or co-manufacturing, that would be another high priority issue of the center that you could align your project with. Okay, then the last thing I wanted to cover was those priority area or priority groups that USDA has designated that are qualified for the 25% match. So this is the USDA, and this is on that link document that I'll go back to in a minute. But this document here is where you can find those definitions, and those are on let's see, I think page 27. But basically, I've described how you can get there. So beginning on page 27, section 9.1 is a list of definitions. So you'll want to review these definitions to see if you fall into any of the priority area categories that I shared with you on the slide from USDA. So beginning farmer ranchers, historically underserved farmer or rancher. These are the groups that they've indicated are eligible for that 25% match. So go to this document and make sure to review those definitions as you're thinking about that matching requirement. I also wanted to note that we do have an updated facts document on our website. So top of our website at the bottom of the, at the bottom of our website under resources, there's our updated facts sheet. And you can find a lot of answers to your questions in this document. And Gabrielle has actually put those definitions in this as well. So I did want to encourage people to review this because we have been keeping it updated over the last few weeks as questions have been coming in. All right, I'm going to stop there and open up the call for any questions.
I will go if no one else is going to go. I will definitely go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so there's a couple different questions. So this was sent to me by Christy Athens, who's our local food procurement hub director. I don't know if that's really her title. She says it every time and I don't know. I listen, but she's something about food hub procurement. That's what I know. Anyway, so she just said, so basically what we are is I wear a bunch of different hats. Couple of those hats are being the producer, but our latest endeavor has been, we're in the process of forming a nonprofit. So we have our nonprofit status in Oregon and we're waiting for a nonprofit status, like our 501c3 from the IRS, but we haven't attained that yet. But within that, part of that is education. And so we have a plan, and whether it gets funded externally or not, we're still moving forward with the plan. Obviously, if we have help in funding, we move a lot faster with that plan. And so she mentioned that this might be a way to not only provide a space for education, but also a space for the producers to get together. And so part of that was like our plan was to put in a commercial certified kitchen. And our goal was obviously to have that to where, we're up to state standards, but also to provide a space that other people that don't have the infrastructure built or don't have the funding, that we can have a space that people could come and do what they need to do in that commercial kitchen space. Is that something that, it seems like that's something that would fall under this grant, but I'm just basically trying to wrap my head around, going from the education piece, but also sharing that space with other producers to be able to use that space and what that would look like.
So a commercial kitchen or a shared commercial kitchen would be allowable under the project. So any, funds that you need to build that commercial kitchen, purchase equipment for it, train staff or farmers on how, or I guess make food makers on how to use that equipment. If they need to be certified with commercial kitchen licensing, those would be allowable costs. The permits that you would need for getting I don't know if you have any land use permits or anything like that you would need from the city or the county, but those types of expenses would be allowed with your project. You would, in terms of the education, as long as the education is tied to training folks on either how to make commercially processed value-added products or to use the equipment or the infrastructure itself, that would be allowable. But for, the, activities like nutrition education or cooking classes or that type of education would not be allowed under this grant. So it has to be tied specifically to the infrastructure or use of equipment to support the middle of the supply chain.
Okay. So can I keep piggybacking onto that? So the thing that hit me the most, because that was like a past question after watching the video, it said reach out if you're also, the meat and poultry side. So, we have Ovie's Greenhouse and Gardens, so that's like our produce side of things, and then we have Sitting Bull Farms and Sanders Cattle Company. So we do produce. We have commercial cattle, but then we also have small scale where we are venturing into the eggs and the rabbits and the chickens and all of that, kind of goats, like all the weird kind of specialty things that are coming on the market as well. And so I do have some more questions, and maybe this is for a different time or after everybody else has a chance to ask their questions. The high priority issues that align with the Rocky Mountain Food Business Center. But so my other question is, the area that we live in, we lose power. And not a ton, but often enough. Like, for example, we just had a snowstorm and we were out of power for about a day and a half. And so I'm looking at that going, oh yeah, we could have a storage facility where our commercial kitchen facility is, because we have the building that we have. So we have 160 acres that we own. And on that, we're putting, it's a 60 by 160 building. And so within that, that we wanted the commercial kitchen and then the storage facility. And so I was like, oh yeah, we could do cold storage specifically for produce. But my question is would that also be allowable funds to purchase equipment to help us, go not necessarily off grid, but in case there was an issue that we would have, that we wouldn't lose frozen or refrigerated product while we didn't have electricity?
Amy, can I take this one?
Sure.
Mainly because USDA just gave us some clarification about this the other day. So if you were to purchase, let's say, a generator to attach to that building to provide you power, that item would be unallowable because the generator could be unplugged and moved to, let's say, your home on the property to power your home, and then it wouldn't be being used within the guides of the grant. If you were to put solar panels on the building where the power is only ever going to be used for that building, it's all attached to that building, that would be potentially allowable. But again, you have to tie it into how is that's going to help the middle of the supply chain, how that's going to ensure that you guys remain power, and how none of that power is going to get used for unallowable activities. So for example, if you have in that building cold storage for your meat and poultry products, as well as cold storage for your fruits and vegetables, you couldn't divert the power to the cold storage for the meat products during the duration of the grant if your power was to go out. Excuse me.
Okay.
So,
and the duration is 3 years. Is that, because that was my next question, I guess.
So the duration it ends January 1st, 2027. So whenever we get it funded by USDA, we're anticipating August, but they could take longer, they could take shorter. But the grant will end January 1st of 2027.
Okay.
And then there'll be disposition instructions or disposal instructions based on USDA of the equipment and things that you've purchased. But those are still yet to come out. So we'll have to deal with that when that comes.
Okay.
Sorry, Amy, they just gave us some more guidance on that the other day, and I wanted to make sure we were updating people.
No worries. Other questions? Is it Lanique?
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a lot of other questions, but I'll let other people ask, and then maybe they'll get answered. And if they aren't, then I'll ask later.
Okay. Amanda, do you have a question?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for offering these office hours. And I know you mentioned in this presentation that the infrastructure funds could be used to purchase a refrigerated vehicle. I was wondering if that is also something that could go under the equipment grant as well, if we find an affordable enough vehicle.
I'm going to ask Gabrielle. I don't think refrigerated vehicles are allowed under equipment, but Gabrielle?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Okay.
So any piece of equipment that it's the same rules for both infrastructure and equipment side of this grant. So any piece of equipment that the infrastructure side could purchase, the equipment side could purchase as well. But again, the equipment is really equipment only. So if you're going to purchase a refrigerated truck, you have to make sure you explain it's only going to be used in the middle of the supply chain. This is why we need it, those types of things. If you're going to purchase it within a infrastructure project, you really have to explain, again, why is it needed on an infrastructure side of things? If you're, let's say, doing a processing line, and then all of a sudden you want a refrigerated truck as well. So it has to be special purpose. It has to be for the middle of the supply chain, and it has to be allowable. So let's say a pickup truck. A pickup truck is going to haul your produce from point A to point B on the farm after it's been harvested. But point B is not a processing facility. That's not allowable. Once it hits a processing facility and before it hits market is what USDA considers, quote unquote, the middle of the supply chain.
Sorry, after it hits processing and before it hits market? Is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay.
The document that we will share in your email in a few moments after this meeting, you will get that FAQs link in the FAQs that we have on our RFSI website. It gives the USDA definition of middle of the supply chain. I'm trying to pull it up right now. That's why I'm taking a little bit. So USDA defines the middle of the supply chain as production, processing, aggregation, and market. So for the guides of the RFSI, middle of the supply chain refers to the two middle stages, processing or aggregation distribution.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we process our produce on site at the farm, and we were just interested in trying to purchase a refrigerated van to transport the processed produce to its endpoint. So it sounds like that would be allowable under the definition, right?
Yep, as long as it's transporting the processed goods and
Mhm.
only the processed goods, not like going into the field to be part of the harvest. It's once it hits that processing after something's happened to the item and then moving forward, then yes.
And processing can just mean washed, right? It's just washed and weighed.
Yep.
And yeah, okay. And then I'm guessing the funds would not be able to cover like insurance for the vehicle or anything outside of just the vehicle itself, right?
In the
Correct.
equipment side, yes.
Yeah, equipment, yes. Mhm.
Equipment, it could cover insurance?
No, in the equipment
Sorry.
track, it would only cover the acquisition of the vehicle, but not the insurance. I mean, not any other expenses besides the piece of equipment.
Okay, I thought so. Are you saying that that would be different if it was on the infrastructure side, though?
I think possibly, Gabrielle, would that include things like insurance?
I believe so. If nothing else, I think you could bring it as a matching fund, I would assume, for that program.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then maybe mileage expenses or gas or anything like that too?
I'm not Ooh, that's a good question. Because the program can pay for travel. So basically what that travel is in this program, the idea is, let's say one of your staff have to travel from the main office to the construction site multiple times a week. And that type of mileage would be dispersible within this program, and something the grant could pay for. So I'm not sure about the gas for the vehicle to go place to place, but I would assume we could ask for that because it would be a travel item within the distribution. Under distribution, it would be a travel item. So that's a great question. I don't know
Okay.
off the top of my head.
Okay.
Because we can ask for mileage, so I wouldn't see why we couldn't ask for that as well. But
Maybe
it
we
would
should
have to be
ask-
mileage.
Maybe we should ask USDA that.
Yeah. Let me dig into the 2 CFR 200 and see if I can come up with a better answer for you on that.
Okay.
Amanda, your email's in the chat, correct?
I came in a little late, so if that was asked for in the beginning, no, but I'll put it in there right now.
That would be great. We'll subscribe you to the listserv, send out some of the documents that we're messing with today, and then I will email you back when I get a clear answer from USDA on that. Here's my thing. I would rather you put it into the application, request for it now. When we go into the editing process, if you receive funds headed to the USDA, then we can take it out and you would still have the funds technically awarded to you, but we would move it to something else if that item was unallowable. So I would
Right.
rather you put it in than leave it out and then have to mess with it later.
Okay. And
It
two
seems-
more quick
I was-
questions. Oh,
I was just gonna say, it seems like you might be able to justify it as well as, you know, like building the food resilience so that, you know, going to different markets or like expanding your market so that you have that resilience. So like if a market shuts down, I don't know, I'm just spitballing opportunity there possibly.
yeah, thank you. And two quick questions. This isn't reimbursement based, right? It would just be upfront funds?
The funds
Yes.
are,
Go ahead, Amy. Sorry.
Yeah. yeah, so the funds are dispersible. So you would get an installation of funds at the outset of your project. I believe it's 50% of the ask that's been approved. And then subsequent disbursements would be based on those reporting requirements. So once you've submitted
Okay.
your progress report and your financial workbook, then you would get the 25, I think it's 25% after that. And then the remaining one will be held back until your final reports are submitted. So that one may, in fact, act more like a reimbursement depending on your cash flow. But then that remaining amount would be distributed after we've received all of your final documents required under the program.
Okay.
I did want to mention just really quickly one note about match that I want to make sure people understand with the infrastructure, and then another comment about producers applying. So we have received clarification from USDA that the match requirement for the infrastructure grant is towards the total project cost. So the matching requirement is not based on the amount of funds that you are requesting. It is on that total project cost. So if your total project, keep in mind that the minimum amount for the infrastructure grant is $100,000. So if you are, if you don't meet that 25% reduced match, you're required to bring 50% of the funds. So that would essentially be a 1-to-1 match. So if your project is $200,000, you would be able to request 50% of that from USDA, and you would need to come up with the remaining $100,000 in matching funds, either cash or in-kind contributions. So I want to make sure that that's clear. There's been some confusion about that from folks. The other thing about producers, because there are very limited funds for this grant program, I think it's important to keep in mind how competitive the projects will be. And what Gabrielle and I have been, I think, giving guidance on is, of course, as a producer, you are eligible for these funds as long as you're using them for middle of the supply chain activities. But also keep in mind that the more the projects can demonstrate collective impact on other producers or producers in your region that also need that kind of infrastructure support, the more competitive your proposal will be, due to how limited the limit in the funds that we have. So that doesn't mean that you wouldn't be awarded funds, but I think it does mean that your project could be more competitive if you're working with other producers who may be, using the same types of products or growing the same types of crops and need a value-added market for those crops, or they need specific processing or aggregation help with those crops. So that's something to just keep in mind. This is, as far as we know, this is one-time funding. Again, this is not yet a permanent program at USDA, unlike other grants that they release on a quarterly cycle or farm bill cycle. As far as we know, this is only one-time funding, but you never know, that could change. Mike has a question. What is in-kind contributions and how are funds already invested considered as a match requirement? So an in-kind contribution is any type of service or good or piece of or goods or pieces of equipment that will be used for your project where money doesn't exchange hands. So if you have, either your labor or maybe someone else's labor that's going to be used toward specifically towards the project, maybe installing a piece of equipment, training people on how to use it, etc. That could be used as in kind. Maybe there's a contractor that you're working with that could provide some in-kind hours towards a part of your project. That would be allowable as well. Previously purchased equipment or existing infrastructure that you're already using, again, it has to be towards the project. You have to be using it for those middle of the supply chain purposes. That can also be used, and you would determine that based on the depreciated value of that equipment or infrastructure. So, and that I don't know exactly what that would be because that would just determine on how long you've owned the equipment, if you've already completely depreciated it in your taxes, what that amount would be, etc. But you can use things like that. You can also use indirect costs, can be brought towards in-kind match as well. And then on the other, so things like rent, if you're paying rent for a facility, that can be brought as in-kind match. I know that money exchanges hands for rent, but what they really mean by that is money doesn't exchange hands specifically for something related to the project or activity, but you can bring those overhead costs towards your in-kind match. So the earlier question about insurance, for example, Amanda, that may be where you could use that insurance for the vehicle as one of your match contributions if you applied for an infrastructure grant. And then, cash match would be anything where money has exchanged hands. So if you currently have funding from another source, so maybe another grant that you already have and you're going to purchase something under those grant dollars or loan or any sort of liquid capital, maybe a piece of equipment that you're going to purchase for your project, that can be also used as match. So basically any monies that you have. Another note about match, you cannot use, well, two other things I think important to mention about match. One is that the matching needs to be secured by the time you apply. So there have been lots of questions from other folks that are interested in the grant about whether, some of them have some grants that they've applied for example, that are open right now, but they won't know until later this spring whether they're awarded. Unfortunately, because those decisions aren't made and we won't know if they've received those funds, they can't use those as match because those funds are not yet secured. So that's something to keep in mind. Or say you've applied for a small loan, but you won't know until May if you've been approved for that loan. Unfortunately, you can't use that as secured match. With federal dollars, so if you have a federal grant already, if that federal grant, let me see, I'm trying to remember, this is kind of an important one. So if you have a federal grant, let's see. Okay, so if you already are providing match with the use of federal funds elsewhere, you can't do that you can't duplicate that match with this project. All right. So looks like Gabrielle did have to jump off the call, but if you have any questions for her, we're both monitoring that email inbox for Resilient Systems Grant at ODA. Feel free to just send us an email there if you have any questions. We both monitor that. Okay. More questions? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was sorry. So I'm just looking at, so if we were to build the facility, so like I'm just trying to, again, trying to like wrap my head around like, so until January 1st, 2027, whatever we build, okay, so we have another grant that we're looking at that is not an infrastructure grant. So like you cannot build with it. So we've already, like the structure, like the bones are already there. We haven't, necessarily like done anything beyond that because we're still trying to like fine tune where everything is going to go. Could you look at like, so if the contractor bid out this section of the building that was specifically going to be used for this project, right? So the commercial kitchen, that was not only going to be used for our product, right? From like, because we're a producer, but also other producers that are going to come and use our commercial kitchen or our certified kitchen. And then that cold storage area and the frozen storage area. That we could potentially, we get that quote directly from the contractor for that section of the building and have that be part of the grant request for that construction piece.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then funds for hiring someone or paying out money as far as, because I know that I've been a part of a shared kitchen space before, and that just kind of became a little bit of a nightmare if we didn't have someone who was in charge of making sure everything was properly working or,
Mm-hmm.
If something was broken. Can you write in those funds as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So as long as it ties again to your project, so the way I would word that is, even though that position may live beyond the duration of the grant, you'd want
That
to
person specifically for said entity from now until January 1st,
Right.
2027.
And what they would be doing is standing up a lot of the the standard operating procedures of your kitchen and managing the use of it, making sure that everybody that's using it is in compliance with their license. And so you just would want to make sure it ties specifically to the purpose of your project, rather than saying something like, what we're really going to need to support this commercial kitchen is a manager, and and you really just need to give the justification for that expense or for that personnel. But yes, personnel costs are allowable in the infrastructure grant.
Is there guidance on like appropriate wages for that, or is it kind of just at our discretion? We're just struggling a little bit here, obviously to find quality employees. Unfortunately, you have to pay them a little bit more, and I don't want to price ourselves out, but I also know the value of having that type of employee.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, minimum wage, like you're not going to get that person, I guess is what I'm saying. So I just didn't know if there was like guidance on that anywhere, or if you had recommendations for that.
Yeah, I believe there's some guidance in the program.
Okay.
I would do some research on that. I think as long as you're within kind of an industry standard for what it is that if there's a certain amount of expertise that the the other thing is if you wanted to help, let's say you've hired someone that needs specific training on how to manage a commercial kitchen or would benefit from, some sort of specialized training or expertise, that type of expense could be covered in your project as well. So, thinking about building the capacity of personnel to be able to implement the project efficiently, that would be allowed. So, but I don't think they've set any. They haven't
Okay.
really set specific guidelines on wages.
Right.
As far as I know, I mean, I've been looking through some of the material as we've been talking, and I haven't seen anything that says. I think if, generally speaking, I think that there's an awareness about these costs, contractor costs, or building and installing really like highly technical food safety equipment and what those typically cost. So
Right.
I would again just make sure that you are doing your due diligence and research on that, and it's the same with your expenses, right? I mean, you're going to
Right.
be asked to submit examples or resources for why does this equipment cost as much as it does. You're going to be asked to submit, a website or a quote or something like that. So, I think you just want to make sure that, what you're asking for is not completely
Unrealistic.
unreasonable. Yeah.
Okay. And then the disposal piece that she was talking about, like that was my only that was my only fear. Like as soon as she said that, I was thinking, wow, I don't want to design all like
No,
what does that look like? I guess like I was sitting there going, man, I don't want to like have to rip out this
no,
part
I
of the
don't.
building.
I will confirm that with her, but I absolutely don't. I don't think that's the way that she meant that comment. I think
Okay,
it
well,
might.
I was just like, whoa, that like this would be a new thing for me.
Yeah, no.
Oh,
I
okay.
think it has more to do with so you may be required to and I don't know what the USDA agreements look like yet, but you may be
Right.
required, for example, to keep I know that with ODA funding, you have to keep all records of your receipts and invoices for projects up to 6 years. And then you're able to dispose of them. But in the event that we were to undergo an audit, sometimes our grantees get selected for those audits.
Okay.
So I believe that's what she meant by disposal, but I can't imagine that the USDA would require destruction of any of the infrastructure or
Okay.
equipment. But I don't want to speak on USDA
Right.
or Gabrielle's behalf because
Right. But
sometimes
that's not a normal, right? Like that would
no,
not be.
I've never heard of that.
Okay.
However, at the same time, this is a very unique program. This is sort of an unprecedented program. USDA has not offered full funding for equipment and infrastructure in the past. So
Right.
I'm going to make sure that I will definitely confirm that with Gabrielle.
Okay.
And then she can send out a note to the listserv, or I'll send it to the general inbox and CC you on it,
Okay.
Lanique. But did you put your email in the chat
Yeah,
box?
mine was it's Bridging the Gap.
Okay.
So Bridging the Gap.
Yeah, I can't imagine that would be the case.
Okay.
Maybe there's something in there about requiring you to use it for a period of time. I don't know.
Right. Okay. And then I guess my last question would be, I'm going to piggyback off of Mike's question about the monitoring and reporting responsibilities. So I know on another, like I just wrote for a farm to school grant, and we were allowed to put a percentage for grant management time. Is that allowable with like under this grant as well?
Let's see. I believe so. Yeah. You mean managing the grant, like
Yeah, like all the paperwork stuff and doing the quarterly or the semi-annual reports and finishing all of that, like the actual grant reporting piece. We could do up to 10% of our of the farm to school grant. We could allot for paying somebody to manage that or ourselves or whatever.
Yeah. I'm just looking through I'm pretty sure you can use a portion of your, I don't think there's a limit, but obviously,
Okay. Right.
again, you just want to make sure that, you know, if the
Within a
project's going to
reasonable-
be, if the overall project's going to be 20% of your time, then you would charge towards the grant 20% of your time. But it
Okay.
wouldn't fund a full FTE for 2 years or
Right.
whatever. You just, again, want to make sure it's a reasonable ask and that you're not necessarily creating positions for the sake of creating positions.
Yeah.
I'm not, let's see.
And that's kind of where like it's hard for me because Christy was like, "Oh, this sounds like this would be great for you guys," and I'm like, "But I don't have anything yet. Like I haven't created it yet. It's in the process."
Mhm.
And so that's what she was saying, and she was like, "I think, you know, what you're talking about building could really benefit all of us because they're really like in Union and Wallowa counties because I have 2 different locations for like, well, we farm on 2 different locations. One is in Wallowa County, one's in Union County. But, you know, she was saying we just don't have a commercial certified kitchen space. Like we can't even bake anything, you know, like we're trying to, like, she's trying to get me to get all these licensings. And I'm like, that's great, but I have to like build the kitchen. Like I have to get the kitchen certified.
Right.
And my house doesn't
Right.
qualify because I have animals. And so I'm like, I'm not going to not have my stuff going on in my house so that I can certify my kitchen. Like I can't justify that. I won't justify that. So that was that's the whole purpose of this other building. It can just be what it is out there. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So let's see. Just looking at, so it does say that hiring term-limited personnel to assist with project implementation activities are allowable.
Okay.
Let's see.
And where are you looking? Like, where are you looking right now?
So it's in the, so if you go to ODA's webpage,
Yep.
and you look at the RFA, the request for applications,
Okay. So the RFP.
all of that information all the eligibility information is in,
Okay.
in there.
Okay.
So
I can do that research. Great.
yeah. And then, there may also be some information in there about,
The funding for recording.
I don't think so, but I will see. Well, I'm going to pose some of these questions to the general inbox. We can have Gabrielle weigh in on them too.
Okay.
So the monitoring and reporting responsibilities, so those are going to be handled by ODA. So if your grant is selected for awardship, there's a contract or agreement that you have to sign with the state in order to receive the funds. And in that agreement, you're basically agreeing to provide or complete these progress reports and final reports on your project, and also submit these expenditure workbooks, which you will be provided a template of that expenditure workbook when you get awarded. And basically that's how you will if you already have systems like QuickBooks or others to manage your budgets and your financial bookkeeping, you will have to put that information into this Excel expenditure workbook that you will then submit to ODA on I think either an annual or quarterly. I don't know what it will be, quarterly or annually, or how that will work, but you will be required to do that. So ODA will handle all the reporting. And that will be with our new staff, whoever's hired for this to manage RFSI. Did that answer your question, Mike? Is Mike still on? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah, he is.
is there someone, and it looks like maybe there's somebody else on too? Heather? Heather, did you have any questions that haven't been answered today?
I'm sure that we have plenty of questions, but I don't have enough clarity from my team about what is unanswered. So I'll look through the documentation, and then I also took note of the email address and will email any questions that I have.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
So, Amy, one more question. Would this, so I'm kind of just thinking like going back to looking at that Rocky Mountain Food Business Center. So I'm just trying to like under there, it does look like, you know, the animal proteins are on there under the high priority issue. So here's my fear. So I'm super gun shy right now as far as grant applications go, because I applied for 4 separate mini grants for farm to school, and one of them got approved and 3 of them got denied because of the signature. And I still don't have clarity on why we got denied, because we weren't a school and we weren't a tribal entity, and we clarified that. But
so can I ask you a question about that? Is that with USDA funds or state funds?
No, that was state funding. I'm just saying, like, that was my first grant application. So all of a sudden I'm like panicked that I'm not doing it right. So
are you okay?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I oversee the farm to school program at ODA. Did you apply to ODA or did you apply to ODE, Department of Ed?
Yeah, ODE.
Okay. So you are a producer, correct?
Yeah, so I'm a producer in several, like we have 3 different producer entities, and then I have a nonprofit entity. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I will tell you that, ODA I will be opening an equipment and infrastructure grant soon that's state funded, and it's specifically for businesses that have or want to make products for schools.
Awesome.
And you need to be working with a school district. A school district does have to submit a letter of intent to buy or a letter of intent to purchase with you. Awesome. And that's going to be opening in the next few weeks. Okay. It's a smaller amount of money. However, the matching requirements are very minimal. And it's a much more flexible grant because it's state funding. Okay. So if you like, and actually on our webpage, on our farm to school webpage at ODA, all of last biennium or last cycle's information is up there. There's very few minor changes, but you could look through some of that. The new material will be up probably in the next few weeks. Awesome. And that will open very soon. And that does cover essentially all the same types of infrastructure and equipment that this one does. But again, it's much smaller. There's only $500,000 available in funds.
Okay. Would that support meat stuff as well, or no?
That will support any products that are served in public school meals or in tribal meals. So any, seafood, poultry, eggs, awesome. Beef, pork, grains, dairy, but fruits and vegetables. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm looking at, I actually teach in Elgin School District as well right now. I'm the CTE. I'm a science teacher and also career and technical education ag side of things. So I finally got approved. So I've been doing like the nonprofit work I've been doing by myself without, an entity, just like as Lanique, as a human being who wants kids to learn stuff. Which is why I realized, wow, we really have a need for this. So we hosted a couple butchering clinics this summer, and my administrator was like, no, we're not doing that. And I'm like, Diane, this is so important. Like, this is such valuable stuff. She's like, no, we're not killing stuff. I'm like, but Diane, like, it's a reality. Like, we get, like, these kids eat meat, we eat meat, like, it's a thing. So she got on board, and her grandson absolutely loves it. So he actually, works with me part-time now because we have, my aunts actually have the USDA small animal processing facility in Wallowa County. So, it's really fun because he comes and works just from a little butchering hands-on clinic that we put on. But we got approved. We're going to do one butchering clinic through the school, this spring. So I'm really excited about it, because rabbits are the only thing that we don't have to be USDA. So we're going to butcher rabbits, which for a lot of people is like a big, like, no, we can't butcher the rabbits. But I'm just kind of thinking through, that was something that, we had talked about doing here at the school, but I just don't know how long I'm going to last in public education. I've come back 4 different times and it just is not, it's just not public school. State standards are really hard for me. So we're really trying to push the nonprofit and get the outdoor education and the it's basically morphed into sustainability and self-resilience. So so that's, yeah, so we're going to try to push that direction. So I will definitely look at that infrastructure, because that's, when you do hobby farming, it's really easy. When you start to try to feed, and we have a small school, 300 people, but when you start to try to feed 300 people, you're like, whoa, 40 eggs a day is not, it's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it. So cool. Awesome.
Yeah,
well, I'm really
so-
excited about that.
Yeah, and that grant is, so you would be able to, so education and culinary, so with the butchering, that's interesting. The butchering, as long as you can, I mean, again, like the culinary education or the butchery, you're maybe just even like doing some upskilling with meat processing or teaching kids about butchery skills. That would not be, I don't think the ODA Farm to School grant would cover that.
Right. I'm just saying like a facility, because like right now, like I said, I have my hobby farm, which is one barn, and so now all of a sudden I personally now have 50 hens, because in my science class, we're doing a genetics project on egg colors. And so it's like a long-term genetics project that I've been working on personally for 4 years, but we're now, like we're kind of moving that in. And we originally talked about it being at the school, and then I'm not getting any, like I don't have a stipend or anything. So I just couldn't justify having stuff at the school, because we're only a 4-day week. So I was having to drive back into school to do the tours and then drive back home, and you're like, I'm not doing this. So right now I'm looking at it going, wow, I just don't have enough space to do it the way that I want to, like I don't want to be like that big commercial feel. I want it like people to come and be able to walk into chicken coops and not have it be an overwhelming chicken smell, or, come to see rabbits in a culinary style or a colony style, but also in a, hutch style, so that kids can really like, it's not even just kids, but like people can see this can be super easy in a tiny amount of space. This could be super easy in a larger amount of space. So, just building that infrastructure of like, how do you get the amount of stuff that you need to produce for a school? Because it's all of a sudden you're like, wow, that's a lot of kids. That's a lot of mouths to feed. And like I said, when you have 20 chickens of your own, you're like, oh yeah, this is more than enough eggs. And then you're like, 50 should be plenty. And then you're like, oh no, 50 doesn't even feed the kindergarten class hardly, so.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. One other question too about the DUNS number. For our outfitting business, we have to like actually be registered, but I'm wondering if we just have to get the UEI number, or if do we have to register through the whole process, or do we just have to get the entity number? Do you know?
I would just so the UEI, if you go to the UEI, the SAM.gov website, it should have very specific instructions. You do need to have that UEI number.
But we just have to have the number. We don't necessarily have to, like, because it's just, there's 2 different things. There's just an award or all awards. So like, you don't have to register if you're just getting a financial award. You do have to, it looks like you do have to register if you want all awards. And so I'm assuming this would just be getting awarded.
Why don't we circle up about, I want to make sure I answer Mike's questions, and then we can cover that.
Sounds great.
Mike, okay, so when I made my initial call at the first of the month, I remember it came up in conversation that the grant will fund 1/2 and then disperse the other half over time or with benchmarks of a plan met, like progress payments. Can you refresh me on how the grant funds? So So basically what will happen, Mike, is if you are awarded the funds, you will sign a contract with ODA, and on the execution of that contract, the agency will process your first payment. That payment will be 50% of the funds you've been awarded. So if you've got a $100,000 grant that's been approved, you would get $50,000 of that at the outset of your project. And then based on, I think it sounds like maybe there will be annual reports. So you would have 1 year, I think that's what Gabrielle had said, to spend those funds. And then you would submit a progress report, which would be basically it's basically like just a questionnaire or an evaluation of how your project's going. And you would fill that out. And then you would also submit your workbook, your expenditure workbook of how you've spent those $50,000. So if you've had some things that have gone awry, and this happens all the time where, oh, I wanted this piece of equipment, it's no longer available. Can I purchase this one instead? Or I've got to move some funds from personnel or from my equipment costs to personnel, or I need to move things to supplies. That type of stuff happens all the time. And in your contract, it'll give you the instructions on when those types of decisions warrant an amendment to your contract or an amendment to your budget. And so those are kind of a case-by-case situation. And Gabrielle can tell you more about, if you have specific questions. Sometimes if it's going to be more than 10% of that budget category, you would need a agency approval. So if you were going to take a big chunk of your equipment costs and move them somewhere, you would need to let the agency know. But all of that would be covered once you become a grantee. All of that process would be be covered. So so then once you've submitted your progress report and you're in good standing with spending down that original that half of your funds, the $50,000, then you would be issued your second installment of funds. I just don't know the exact timeline of all of this because we have yet to sort of build that out. But sometimes in my experience with the state funded grants, for example, sometimes grantees spend those funds right away. Sometimes they spend them over time. But you will always be issued those funds as long as, everything with your project is running smoothly. And even if there are some hiccups, usually there's some adjustments that can be done to make sure you keep getting the funds. Yeah, right. I mean, sometimes um sometimes it is true. It's you're kind of you have to operate at a scale that's viable for your business. Property acquisition cannot be part of the infrastructure grant. You cannot buy property with the infrastructure dollars. You can buy oh, go ahead. I would encourage you to look over the facts sheet on the ODA website, because that really gives you a sense of what's allowable in terms of the purchases. Like I said, you can do new construction of a building on existing land. Okay. Any other questions?
I don't have any about this grant, but I was going to pick your brain a little bit about the infrastructure, the ODA infrastructure grant if you have a minute, but if not, I can totally we'll email you
Yeah,
later.
I have a minute.
Okay.
All right,
So
well, I am gonna just stop recording this call. And Mike, if you don't have, you're welcome to stay. We're just gonna close the resilient food system infrastructure office hours. So thanks for joining, everybody. I'm gonna turn off the recording and then we can just stay on the line, Lanique, and chat about that.
awesome.